Welcome everyone. It's nice to see all of you. So last time we've started to go over a question that I've received, which was something like how to deal with breakups and break the attachment to that person. So I've discussed the first part of that question, which is how to deal with breakups, just discussing breakups a little bit from one particular perspective that given time. Today I'm going to have a look at the second part a bit more, which is about breaking the attachments to a certain person. And in order to, I'm using this wording because that's the question that I've received. In order to break the attachment, what we need to first do is to understand the mechanics of attachment, to understand attachment, first of all, to know exactly what it is. You can't deal with anything if you don't know what it is. All right. So in order for us to deal with something that arises within our experience, within ourselves, it's always first really important to understand it properly. To be able to define it and to be able to clearly see into it is the first step. So the nature of attachment, if you had no books, no teachers, no input from the internet in any way, if you were living in the forest by yourself and you had to deal with the difficulty of attachment, how would you go about this? You have nobody telling you what to do. There's no group of people who are skilled in internal practices or anything like that. What would you do? There's no books to read, nothing to Google. There's just you and your experience. So you're totally cut off from any kind of group consciousness, from any kind of community that would give you some input or that you would try to become like, some sort of ideal. So then how would you know what is attachment? What would exactly tell you on this experience right now, that is attachment? If we're going to approach this that way, do you want to take some time and sit down and actually gain some clarity over your own experiences, rather than having someone to tell you who you're supposed to be like or what you're supposed to become, and so forth. I think that is a big problem nowadays. We go to the internet for so many of our questions. We stop learning the thing for ourselves. All the thoughts that are in our heads are usually coming from some sort of group collective that has put them up there in the internet, and then you think they are your original thoughts when you're just able to repeat something that you've read or heard or watched in a video. That's a definition of slavery, a mental slavery. Your way of thinking, your way of feeling, your way of acting is largely dependent upon this group consciousness, this body of knowledge that's out there. But in meditation practice and spiritual training, we do not really try to rely too much on this body of knowledge which is out there. Rather, we're trying to rely on the knowledge which is in there, and is a different type of knowledge. And it begins with just a simple ability to observe something. How does any scientist get to know anything? Well, they get to know it by observing it, right? And then once they've observed it, they understand some of the laws and mechanics that are apparent, and then they begin to work with those laws and mechanics to try to put them to the test. See if they still work out in different scenarios. Does that still work under pressure? Does it work when it's hot, when it's colder? Does it work still the same way? Is it at all influenced by other circumstances and so forth? And so you develop this vast body of testing the theories that you come up with. And in a way, that's what I encourage you guys to do. So you experience attachment. And suddenly you feel also like, oh, I want to break it. What gave you the idea that you need to break attachment? Even before knowing it, really. Like you came to the conclusion, this is attachment and it must be broken. I find that already quite interesting for a start. Just questioning our assumptions that we have about our own experiences. Is it really bad? Is attachment bad? It's bad, yeah. I don't like it at all. Why not? Why don't you like it? What exactly is it about this experience that you dislike? And what would it be that dislikes the experience of attachment? Is there some sort of self and then there is attachment? How do they relate? Like, oh, attachment comes to me. I don't like it. I try to get rid of it, cut it off, build a wall between me and attachment, burn it to dust. Because it's not good. So why is it not good? Because I've read that in a book. Shouldn't have that kind of experience. Keep it for the end of the session. There will be Q&A. Perhaps most of us will understand that there are experiences that we dislike. We resist them. We push against them. Here's an interesting question. Is it the dislike that makes the experience unpleasant, or is the experience unpleasant due to its own virtue, by itself? Is the wind out there, is it bad by itself? Or is it bad in relation to my dislike? Is the weather bad because it's bad in its own way? Would the weather recognize its own badness? Has it decided to be bad? Is there even such a thing as an it? Is the weather is there an it? Like, ooh, that's the weather. And it's bad. You see, it's like really cartoonish sometimes the way our black and white thinking works. We see, this is this is that. It's so simple. And it's nice for things to be simple because then you know whose side you're on and you know what to fight. And so then you can feel really comfortable in your little group consciousness again. I belong to this group. There's power in groups. You're not sticking out. That means you're not going to be attacked. At best, the group's going to be attacked. But not you as an individual. To stick out as an individual, there's always some danger to that as well. If you stick out, you're going to be targeted. So you have a look at your attachment without any preconceptions. Put them all aside. Think you're some sort of alien that has a first-time experiences in a human body. What is it like to be a human being? You approach yourself like that. Your whole body of experience like that. You don't even know how to call it. Any of it. You don't know whether it's useful or not, good or bad or whatever. You just enter it with this kind of curiosity. You just watch. What is attachment? What's the experience of attachment like? What is it like to have it? What is it that has it?
Desire.
Look. Try not to come up with an answer. Keep looking instead. As soon as you come up with an answer, you're limited by that answer. Immediately. You think, it's green. Bop, you're limited right there. That's the end. You think you know what it is. That's careful. You need to be careful with that because that will happen a lot. If you watch your attachment and suddenly you feel like, I know what it is. It's this thing or that thing. Are you sure? Where do you take that certainty from? Now that you know how to call it, does that mean you know it? There's also something about calling a place, a location, whatever. When we do our retreats, I've mentioned that many, many times. Please forgive me. All of those are listening to that a lot. So there's one thing when we go out in the morning during our retreats and we do these morning excursions, we go to some beach. We do the meditation there. And then there's a morning talk. And then after the talk, people are asking some questions. And one of the most frequent questions is, how's this place called? There seems to be some sort of restlessness that gives rise to this question. It's quite interesting. You don't know what it's called like. So you don't really know where you are. As you don't know where you are, there is a danger. Something could happen to you. You may want to find that same place later on, but maybe you're not able to. So that there's some restlessness associated to that question, which gives rise to that question. I would encourage you to stay with that and explore it a bit further. What is it like not to have any idea about your own experience? Being totally ignorant about it, actually. And all our apparent knowledge that we have of our experiences are just little words, grunts that some human being once created. Now I see what it is. It's an ivda. Good to know that it's an ivda and not that's language. And then we all agree that ivda is something good and something bad. And then we do that for 1,000 years, and we all are convinced that we absolutely know that's an ivda. Don't you know it's an ivda? It's totally clear to me. How can you not know it? Have you been living under a rock for all those years? You don't know what this is? What if those words, the labels, the grunts that we attach to something inexplicable actually cover up your ignorance? They just cover it up. They just keep you in a kind of state where you feel relatively safe. Because you feel like you have some sort of control and you know what's going on, which is nice. So you can kind of relax and lay back. Like when you tell the person that asked the name of the beach, it's called Naihan Beach. And then something switches within them. It's almost visible. Now they can go back to thinking about random stuff. They can go back to their autopilot. They're not disturbed anymore. Disturbed by their ignorance. How do I call this? What is this? Where am I? So now that we can just go back into this blah blah mode where we talk to ourselves about random, useless kind of things in our own head. We can go back to sleep. We're not called into wakefulness by our own ignorance. And the attachment is the same kind of thing. If you were to just plainly look at it for what it is, not for what you call it, but for what it actually is, what would you then experience? How would you boil down your experience to the most simple level? The most objective level possible. It means you'd had to go beyond all these ideas, perceptions of good and bad and so forth. It had to come down to a level that is valid for all of us. For example, I'm feeling something right now. There is a feeling. All right, what's that like? Have a deeper look. Where is it in your body? That feeling that you have previously called attachment. Where is that? Most people don't know that either. They have to kind of really look, sustain, and they're like kind of bounces around. It doesn't really have any fixed location. Wow, that's pretty interesting too. Does it behave in a predictable way? What if you were trying to get rid of that feeling? How would it influence that feeling? What if you were trying to get more of that feeling? What would happen? How could you produce more of it? What's actually causing it? How do you need to place your attention so that you experience that particular kind of feeling? What's the causality chain that leads up to it? What kind of narrative images do you need to produce to get to that feeling? And before you know, you'll have found out that it's actually not happening to you. Attention is not something that happens to you. It is something that you are doing. Sorry, not attention, but attachment. It's not something that happens to you, but it's something you produce here and now. It's you're doing, you're making it. The only problem is we don't know how, and it happens so fast and it's so habitual in our nervous system that we don't realize how we produce it. Just like you're driving the car and you don't even know that you're driving the car. You can talk with your friend, you can listen to music, you can totally switch off with your thoughts and be totally somewhere else, and you still arrive at your goal. How did that happen? Well, it's automatic. Something you do a lot becomes part of your body. And so anxiety, attachments, and so forth, they're also part of our bodies, part of our nervous system, part of our hormonal household. The way we react to circumstances and things is very predictable in that way. And to have that insight that it is you that produces it, to me is that one of the first really relevant insights. First really relevant understanding on the path means, oh wow, wait a second, I'm responsible for the way I feel and think. I'm actually responsible for what I do and what the results of my actions are. Oh, perhaps I need to pay attention to what I'm doing right now. So I'm producing a feeling that I dislike at all. How do I produce it? Attachment. So you come into the mechanics of what is it actually. And a lot of attachment, I find, it comes from the idea that you make something or someone responsible for your happiness. You make it responsible for the end of suffering. Like, oh, I had this person in my life, and that person was in my life, and their function was it to shield me from suffering and to make me happy. It's things we even say, right? You complete me, you make me happy. If someone says, I love you, ask them why, and they will list all the reasons why. And if they're honest, you can see by the list of reasons, that's how they depend on you. That's how they depend their happiness on your presence. And that dependency is not something you have created and implanted in them. It's what they create by themselves. So how do we do it? It's not that interesting how other people do it at all, but it's much more interesting to see how am I doing? How do I create a dependency? And how do I then suffer my creation? I'm attached to that person. Now that person isn't there anymore. I've been leaning upon them, so when they go, I fall. So the problem is not that person at all. The problem is you're leaning on them. We're not leaning on our own spine. We're not leaning on ourselves. We're not a refuge to ourselves. We're not a shelter. We're not sheltering ourselves. To us, unstable things are shelters, refuges. So we want to go and seek help and understanding and love and kindness and acceptance and all these things within other people because we are unable to provide them to ourselves. So we are unsheltered. Because when those people that we have depended our happiness on go away, our happiness goes away. That's the fundamental problem with attachment. And how is it experienced here and now? That's the interesting thing to observe. How am I making myself uncomfortable here and now? It's very interesting. Just recently, our cat died. We've had him for like 10, 11 years or so. And it was devastating. It was really painful, actually. To all of you who have pets, it's devastating to lose them. And so I was sitting here and I was crying. And at the same time, I made it a point to just sit here and observe what happens during this process. What am I doing while I sit here and cry? So not just sitting here a victim of my cat's death, but sitting here with interest in my experience. What is it like? Why am I suffering so much, actually? I want to know why. Many people may think like, oh, it's clear because your cat died. To me, it isn't that clear. I want to know more. I really want to know how it works to suffer. Something as natural as death, as normal as death. Why do we suffer it so much? And so I noticed that I was serving myself these images of, the cat coming and cuddling up with me when I was sitting there and practicing meditation. He would always come and cuddle up here, just sit here, and the way he would look at me, and so all these pictures came up. And when I saw those pictures, I felt this contraction inside. I was contracting around it, almost as if I wanted to protect myself from feeling something there. So there was this kind of struggle, which was very strongly also reflected in the way I would breathe. Like when you cry, you would have this kind of breath, like that's a struggle, isn't it? It's like in, out, in, out, in, out. Like your walls are broken down and you build them back up, and then they're broken down again and you build them back up. So you become vulnerable for a moment, but you don't allow yourself to become vulnerable. Why? What may happen in there? What could happen? So interesting to just observe that. And it took about 2 hours of sitting there and crying and looking and crying and looking and crying and looking. And the whole thing was solved after that for me. I think a lot of the pains that we experience really just want you to pay attention to them. They'd like to be seen and understood. Like, as I mentioned in the other session, right? That's one of the most refreshing things you can get from your friends when you're in a bad space and your friend actually understands you and can relate to you even and knows, man, I know what you're going through and I know it's really tough. Not somebody who gives you advice or anything like that, but somebody that's there with you, where you know you're safe, you're not rejected at all for what you feel, for who you are. And that kind of space, we give it to our feelings, attachment or whatever it is, rather than trying to break it. See if you can understand it. I think that's the fundamental problem. Like people try to break things that makes them uncomfortable, rather than try to understand it, and it will solve all the problems for both ends of the spectrum, for both people. The perpetrator and the victim, they always belong together. There's no victim without the perpetrator. There's no perpetrator without a victim. It's a dance, like life and death, or birth and death. And to understand that dance means that you can let it go to suffer it. You don't need to suffer it. Anyways, so that's what comes up concerning attachment or breaking attachments. I hope that was helpful.